The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Bell Hotel's Grand Ballroom in New York City cast a shimmering glow over the opulent gathering. Laughter mingled with the clink of champagne glasses, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh orchids and expensive perfumes. Women in flowing evening gowns twirled on the dance floor while men in tailored tuxedos networked in hushed tones. This was no ordinary event, it was the gala, celebrating Isabella Lane, the 35-year-old CEO of Lane Corporation, and the launch of their groundbreaking AI technology that promised to revolutionize data security. Isabella stood at the center of it all, radiant in a sleek black gown, her dark hair pulled into an elegant chignon. Beside her on the stage, her 8-year-old daughter Sophie fidgeted in a frilly white dress, clutching a small bouquet of flowers as her mother delivered a poised speech. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Isabella said into the microphone, her voice steady and commanding. "This isn't just about innovation, it's about building a safer future for our children." She smiled down at Sophie, who beamed back with wide, innocent eyes. The audience applauded, warmly flashes from photographers lighting up the room like fireworks. But in an instant, the celebration shattered. From the midst of the crowd, a disheveled man in his 50s pushed forward, his face twisted in rage. His hand trembled as he pulled a concealed pistol from his coat pocket. "You destroyed my family," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "You fired me, without a second thought left us on the streets. Now it's your turn." The barrel of the gun swung wildly, settling on Sophie, who froze in terror, her small hands dropping the bouquet. Screams erupted. Guests scrambled, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks in a frantic rush toward the exits. Isabella lunged toward her daughter, her face pale with horror, but the surging crowd shoved her back, her cries lost in the chaos. 4 security guards stationed near the stage stood momentarily stunned, their hands hovering over holsters as protocol and panic collided. One reached for his radio, another shouted orders, but none moved fast enough. The gunman steadied his aim, his finger tightening on the trigger. Amid the fleeing bodies, one figure moved against the tide. In the shadows near the back of the room, Michael Hale had been crouched by an electrical panel, his worn reflective vest smeared with grease from a last-minute repair job. At 38, he was just another maintenance technician for Lane Corporation, invisible, in his role fixing lights and circuits in the building's bowels. He'd only been called in that evening to ensure the stage lighting held up no invitation to the gala, no reason to be noticed. But when the shout rang out and he saw the gun pointed at the child, something instinctive surged through him. Without a second's hesitation, he bolted from his spot, weaving through the panicked guests with the precision of someone trained for crisis. "Get down!" Michael yelled as he vaulted onto the stage in a blur of motion. He threw himself in front of Sophie, his broad frame becoming a human shield. The girl barely had time to gasp before he wrapped his arms around her, turning his back to the assailant. Bang! The shot echoed like thunder, the bullet tearing into Michael's shoulder, sending a spray of blood across the polished floor. Pain exploded through his body, but he didn't release his hold on Sophie. He collapsed to his knees, his white work shirt blooming red, yet his grip remained firm. Sophie whimpered beneath him, her tiny hands clutching his vest. "You're safe now," Michael whispered through gritted teeth, his vision blurring as shock set in. The gunman faltered, his eyes widening in surprise, but before he could fire again, the security team finally sprang into action, tackling him to the ground. The weapon skittered across the floor and cries for help filled the air. "Call 911! Someone's been shot!" a woman screamed. Paramedics already on standby for the event rushed in from the lobby. The ballroom moments ago, a scene of glamour, now resembled a battlefield. Guests huddled in corners, some sobbing, others dialing frantically on their phones. All eyes turned to the stage where Michael lay slumped, his blood pooling beneath him. Sophie peeked out from his protective embrace, her dress stained but unharmed, tears streaming down her face as she clung to her unlikely savior. Who was this man? No one in the room knew his name. He wasn't a VIP, not a board member or celebrity. Just moments before, he'd been as unnoticed as the wires he repaired. But now, as sirens wailed in the distance and Isabella fought her way back through the crowd to reach her daughter, the question hung in the air. Who was this stranger who had risked everything for a child he didn't know? In the sterile chaos of Mount Sinai Hospital's emergency room, paramedics wheeled Michael Hale through the swinging doors on a gurney, his blood-soaked shirt clinging to the wound in his shoulder. The bullet had grazed his lung, doctors would later say, but it was a miracle he was still breathing. Nurses swarmed around him shouting orders for IVs and scans, while security from the gala cordoned off the area to keep the growing crowd of reporters at bay. Isabella Lane burst through the entrance moments later, her gown torn and mascara-streaked, clutching Sophie tightly against her side. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice cracking as a doctor approached. "The man who saved my daughter. How is he?" "He's stable for now," the doctor replied, glancing at his chart. "Yeah, lost a lot of blood, but he's tough. We're prepping him for surgery." Isabella nodded numbly, her eyes drifting to Sophie, who sat wide-eyed on a plastic chair, her white dress smeared with Michael's blood. The girl hadn't spoken since the incident, only whispering once in the ambulance, "He protected me, Mommy, like a superhero." As Michael slipped into unconsciousness under the bright operating lights, fragments of his life replayed in his mind like an old film reel. He was 38 now, but the man on that gurney had once been far from invisible. In his early 20s, Michael had been Captain Michael Hale, leader of the elite Special Forces unit known as Ghost Wolf. His team specialized in covert operations, the kind that never made the headlines. In 2014, during a high-stakes mission in East Africa, he'd orchestrated the rescue of 12 hostages from a militant stronghold, navigating through enemy fire with precision that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross. Medals had been pinned to his chest in private ceremonies, his name whispered in military circles as a legend. But glory came at a cost, endless deployments, the weight of lives lost, and the constant fear that one day luck would run out. Then came the accident. 5 years ago, on a rainy night, much like this one, Michael's wife Emily had been driving home from her nursing shift when a drunk driver crossed the median. She died instantly, leaving him alone with their 4-year-old daughter Ella. The news shattered him. Ghost Wolf, the unbreakable operative, crumbled under the grief. He resigned from the military, trading fatigues for civilian clothes, determined to give Ella a stable life. No more absences, no more risks. He moved to New York, taking a low-profile job as a maintenance technician at Lane Corporation. Days blurred into fixing HVAC systems in the basement, unclogging drains and rewiring conference rooms, work that paid the bills and kept him under the radar. Colleagues barely knew his name. To them, he was just the guy with the toolbox. Isabella herself had passed him in the halls countless times, without a glance, her world of boardrooms and billions far removed from his. That evening, Michael had arrived at the Grand Bell Hotel Gala not as a guest, but on an urgent call from facilities. The stage's electrical panel was flickering, threatening to derail the event. He'd slipped in quietly, tools in hand blending into the background as always. From his vantage point near the wall, he'd watched the speeches unfold, his mind wandering to Ella, at home with the babysitter. She was 9 now, a bright girl with her mother's curly brown hair and a fascination with superheroes. "Dad, you're like Batman," she'd say during their bedtime stories, "hiding your powers." He'd laugh it off, but deep down he knew the instincts never truly faded. When the gunman's shout pierced the air, those instincts ignited. Michael's training kicked in Assess, Act, Protect. He didn't think about the danger or the odds. He saw a child in peril, her small frame mirroring Ella's vulnerability. In seconds he was on the move, his body a barrier against the inevitable. The impact of the bullet felt like fire ripping through him, but as he fell shielding Sophie, a strange calm washed over him. He'd done what any father would do. Hours later, as Michael emerged from surgery, the first whispers of his heroism began to spread. A guest's shaky cell phone video captured the moment, the anonymous worker charging into the fray while others fled. It went viral on social media within minutes, hashtags like #GalaHero trending as people shared stories of everyday bravery. Sophie, now cleaned up and wrapped in a blanket, refused to leave the waiting area. She tugged at Isabella's sleeve. "Mommy, I want to see him. He saved me." Isabella, still trembling from the ordeal, could only nod, her composure cracking as she realized how close she'd come to losing everything. In that moment, the invisible man had become impossible to ignore. The fluorescent lights in the ICU waiting room at Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed faintly, casting a pallid glow over the worn vinyl chairs and outdated magazines scattered on side tables. The air was thick with the antiseptic scent of bleach, and the distant beep of monitors, a constant reminder of the fragility hanging in the balance. It had been 3 days since the gala shooting, and the world outside had erupted into a frenzy of news coverage. But inside these walls, time felt suspended in a haze of worry and whispered prayers. Ella Hale arrived just after dawn, her small hand clasped tightly in her teacher's as they navigated the sterile corridors. Mrs. Ramirez, a kind woman in her 50s with a gentle voice, had volunteered to bring her from the school where Ella had been staying with a friend. The 9-year-old clutched her faded teddy bear, its fur matted from years of hugs, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy from sleepless nights. "He's going to be okay, sweetie," Mrs. Ramirez murmured, squeezing her hand. But Ella only nodded silently, her curly brown hair falling over her face like a curtain. She pushed open the door to her father's room alone, her sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. Inside, Michael lay motionless, under crisp white sheets, tubes snaking from his arms to IV, stands a ventilator, hissing rhythmically as it helped him breathe. Bandages wrapped his shoulder and chest stained faintly with the remnants of blood. Ella approached the bed hesitantly, her lower lip trembling. She climbed onto the stool beside him, reaching out to touch his hand, cold and still, but familiar. Memories flooded her weekends in their cramped Brooklyn apartment, where Michael taught her basic karate moves in the living room, laughing as she mimicked his stances. "Always protect what's important, kiddo," he'd say, ruffling her hair. Bedtime stories about brave knights and hidden heroes where he'd wink and add, "just like your old man." Those moments felt worlds away, now replaced by the harsh reality of machines and monitors. "Dad," Ella whispered, her voice breaking, "I told you, you're a superhero." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she laid her head on the edge of the bed, the teddy bear pressed against his arm. She didn't know about his military past, yet Michael had always shielded her from those stories, but in her child's heart, he was invincible. The pain in her chest grew a mix of fear and helplessness as she wondered if he'd ever wake up to tell her another story. Across the hall, in a private room arranged for Isabella and Sophie, the atmosphere was equally heavy. Sophie hadn't slept properly since the incident, her nights plagued by nightmares of the gunshot and the stranger's blood. The 8-year-old had seen too much already in her short life, her father's abandonment 3 years ago leaving Isabella to raise her alone amid the cutthroat world of corporate power. Now this. "I want to see him, Mom," Sophie insisted for the umpteenth time, her voice muffled against Isabella's shoulder. Isabella, exhausted and still in rumpled clothes from the vigil, stroked her daughter's hair. "Not yet, honey. He's very sick." But Sophie pulled away, her eyes fierce with determination. "He saved me. I need to say thank you." Reluctantly, Isabella agreed, leading Sophie down the corridor. They arrived just as Ella emerged from Michael's room, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The two girls locked eyes, strangers united by a single act of bravery. Sophie hesitated, then stepped forward. Is your dad hurting a lot?" she asked softly, her voice small and uncertain. Ella nodded, sniffling. "Yeah, but he's strong." Sophie fiddled with the hem of her shirt, guilt etching her young features. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for him to get hurt because of me." Ella shook her head firmly, echoing the lessons her father had instilled. "It's not your fault. Dad always says to protect people who need help. That's what he did." She paused, then extended her hand, the teddy bear dangling from the other. "We have to be strong. For them." Sophie took her hand, the simple touch bridging the gap between their worlds. They stood there in the hallway, two children caught in the crossfire of adult chaos, finding solace in each other's presence. Isabella watched from a distance, her heart aching at the innocence on display, the way trauma had forced them to grow up too fast. Yet their bond offered a glimmer of hope. In that quiet moment amid the hospital's impersonal hum, the girls' clasped hands symbolized something profound. The unintended victims of violence drawing strength from shared vulnerability, unknowingly weaving the first threads of connection between their fractured families. 3 days blurred into a haze of pain and medication for Michael Hale, but when consciousness finally returned fully, it came with an unwelcome spotlight. He awoke in the ICU to the soft beep of monitors and the murmur of voices outside his door. His shoulder throbbed under fresh bandages, a dull fire that reminded him of old battlefield wounds. but the real shock was the cluster of people hovering nearby. Nurses checking his vitals with unusual deference, a hospital administrator peeking in and beyond. The glass flashes from cameras held at bay by security. "What's going on?" He rasped, his voice hoarse from the ventilator tube that had been removed hours earlier. A nurse adjusted his IV with a sympathetic smile. "Mr. Hale, you're famous. The whole country's talking about you." She handed him a tablet tuned to a news app, headlines screaming across the screen, "Mystery Hero Saves CEO's Daughter at Gala Shooting." Videos of the incident replayed in loops, capturing his dash to the stage, the gunshot, and his collapse. Comment sections overflowed with praise, speculation, and calls for recognition. Michael stared, disbelief washing over him. He'd lived in the shadows for years, content with anonymity. Now it was shattered. The revelation of his past began with a single phone call. A former comrade from Ghostwolf, now retired in Virginia, recognized him from a grainy photo in an online article. "That's Hale." The veteran posted on a military forum attaching an old snapshot from their unit. Days Michael, in fatigues, stern-faced after the 2014 East Africa mission, where he'd led the extraction of hostages under heavy fire. The post went viral, picked up by journalists hungry for details. Within hours, articles delved into declassified records. Captain Michael Hale, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for valor, a ghost in the Special Forces world who vanished after his wife's death. "Why did a war hero become a maintenance man?" one op-ed pondered. "From battlefield legend to basement fixer, the untold story of Ghostwolf." Social media exploded. Hashtags like #GhostWolfHero and #InvisibleGuardian trended nationwide, with users sharing personal anecdotes. "My dad was a janitor, unsung heroes everywhere." Veterans groups launched petitions for official recognition, while talk shows debated the societal oversight of blue-collar warriors. Conspiracy theories swirled. Was he undercover hiding from enemies? But the truth buried in public records painted a quieter picture. A man who traded medals for fatherhood, prioritizing Ella's stability over acclaim. Isabella Lane followed the unfolding story from her office at Lane Corporation, her usual poise fracturing as she scrolled through the reports. She'd seen Michael in the building corridors over the past 3 years, a fleeting nod here, a work order there, but never truly noticed him. Now learning of his military honors, the missions that saved lives and the personal sacrifices, guilt gnawed at her. How had she, a leader touting innovation and progress, overlooked the quiet strength right under her roof? She visited the hospital that afternoon, finding Michael sitting up in bed, Ella curled beside him reading a comic book. "Mr. Hale," Isabella began, her voice unsteady, we owe you everything." Michael met her gaze evenly. "Just Michael, and you don't owe me. I did what anyone should." The media frenzy intensified. Reporters camped outside the hospital, microphones thrust forward for sound bites. Networks offered exclusive interviews, book deals dangled, even politicians tweeted support, eyeing photo ops. But Michael rebuffed them all. "I'm no story," he told his doctor, who relayed the message. Finally, under pressure from well-meaning friends in the veteran community, he agreed to a short video statement recorded on a nurse's phone in his room. Propped against pillows, his face pale but resolute, he spoke simply, "I'm not a hero, I'm just a father. That night, I saw a child in danger, and I acted. That's all." The clip uploaded anonymously garnered millions of views, its humility amplifying the impact. Viewers wept over his words, sharing it with captions like, "This is what real courage looks like." For Isabella, watching it alone in her penthouse, it was a turning point, a reminder that true valor didn't seek the limelight. As the nation rallied around this reluctant icon, questions lingered. Would fame pull him from his hidden life, or reinforce the walls he'd built? In the weeks following his discharge from the hospital, Michael Hale navigated a world that had irrevocably changed. The media circus showed no signs of abating. Offers poured in for interviews, endorsements, even a potential run for local office, capitalizing on his hero status. Veterans organizations pushed for a formal ceremony to honor his past service, and corporations dangled sponsorships. But Michael turned them all down with quiet firmness. "I've got a daughter to raise," he'd say to the persistent callers, his voice steady over the phone from his modest Brooklyn apartment. "That's my priority." Fame, he realized, was a double-edged sword. It illuminated the shadows he'd chosen, but it also threatened the simple life he'd built for Ella. He returned to work at Lane Corporation, after a short medical leave, slipping back into his maintenance routine, though now colleagues greeted him with odd handshakes and whispers. Isabella Lane, however, couldn't let his actions fade into obscurity. From her corner office overlooking Manhattan, she grappled with the revelations about Michael's past, the missions, the sacrifices, and her own oversight. One evening, as Sophie played in the adjacent playroom, Isabella made a decision. At a press conference the next day, flanked by executives and flashing cameras, she announced the Michael Hale Foundation. This fund will provide scholarships and support for the children of essential workers, the maintenance staff, janitors, security guards, and others who keep our world running without recognition. She declared her eyes meeting Michael's in the audience where he'd reluctantly agreed to attend. Michael Hale reminded us that true heroes often work in the background. This is our way of honoring them. The foundation launched with a multi-million-dollar endowment from Lane Corporation applications flooding in almost immediately. Michael accepted the namesake with a nod, but only on the condition that it focused on others, not him. As months passed, an unexpected bond formed between the two families. Ella and Sophie, once strangers united by trauma, became inseparable friends. Playdates turned into weekly routines, afternoons at Central Park where the girls chased pigeons and shared secrets under the sprawling oaks. Michael and Isabella found themselves drawn into these moments, their conversations evolving from polite gratitude to deeper sharing. Over family dinners at Isabella's penthouse or picnics on the Great Lawn, Michael spoke quietly of Emily's loss and his choice to step away from the military. Isabella opened up about her own isolation, the pressures of leading a tech empire after her parents' early deaths, and a failed marriage that left her raising Sophie alone. "I built walls to protect us," she admitted one evening, as the sun set over the reservoir. "But you showed me they're not always necessary." One crisp autumn afternoon during a picnic, Sophie tripped while running with a kite scraping her knee. Isabella knelt to bandage it, and Sophie, without thinking, wrapped her arms around her neck. "Thanks, Mom," she said, then froze, realizing her slip. The word hung in the air, innocent yet profound. Isabella's breath caught her eyes meeting Michael's across the blanket. He didn't speak, offering only a gentle smile that conveyed understanding, no pressure, no labels. The moment passed with laughter as Ella pulled Sophie up to continue playing, but it lingered, a quiet acknowledgement of the shifting dynamics. Their lives intertwined in small, meaningful ways. Michael taught both girls basic self-defense moves in the park, his patient instructions echoing his Special Forces days. Isabella, unaccustomed to domestic gestures, began preparing lunches, simple sandwiches with notes tucked inside for Ella's school days. No grand declarations of love emerged. Instead, there was a steady rhythm of support, like the way Michael fixed a leaky faucet in Isabella's kitchen one rainy night, or how she arranged for Ella's enrollment in a better school through the foundation. In the final scene of this chapter, dawn painted the streets of New York in soft gold as Michael walked Ella and Sophie to their shared elementary school. The girls skipped ahead, backpacks, bouncing, chattering about a class project. At the gate, Michael knelt to hug them goodbye. As he straightened, he turned to see Isabella approaching a lunchbox in hand, homemade with fresh fruit and an encouraging note. She handed it to him with a soft smile. Michael placed his hand over hers briefly. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for reminding me why I still believe in people." She nodded, her eyes warm. As the girls waved from the schoolyard, the camera pulled back, the trio silhouetted against the rising sun, a symbol of quiet healing, chosen family, and the enduring power of unspoken kindness. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a hopeful beginning, where silent acts of courage forged bonds stronger than any spotlight could illuminate.